Good morning, Creekside. Miss you guys as always. This morning we're going to be in chapter 3 of Philippians. And I read this passage a couple weeks ago knowing that I was going to speak on it. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. I haven't been able to stop thinking about a couple lines in this verse in particular. And there's this theme that Paul is addressing. Really what it is a warning, but it's a warning about the power of our appetite. It made me think about a book I'd read years ago called Fats, Sugars, and Salts. And it was written by this guy named Michael Moss, who spent 4 years investigating the uh, the food production industry in the United States. And he was recounting this particular meeting where all of the CEOs of like Nabisco and General Mills and all the big food producers got together because it was in 1999, and there's this epidemic of childhood obesity. And so the food industry was trying to figure out what is our role in this and our responsibility. And he said that while all of them admitted that first and foremost they were designing their food for the appetite of the American people, uh, he said he'll never forget the CEO of General Mills stood up at the time and said, "Look, we have a responsibility both to the health of the American people, but also to our shareholders. If we start taking salt and fat and sugar out of the food, people are going to stop buying it. It will no longer fit their appetite. We've spent lots of money designing this food to fit their specific appetite, and our companies will suffer if we change the food." I thought that was really insightful, a little scary, right? But insightful. In this book, he talks about the Oreo in particular, and how the Oreo is this perfectly designed food that they sell $1 billion a year of Oreos, $1 billion in chocolate cookies a year. And they've spent millions of dollars of research with food scientists to perfect the taste, specifically to the appetite of the American diet, I guess, or preference. It kind of shows you that, like, if all we do is indulge our appetites, that we aren't necessarily setting ourselves up for the most healthy of eating. I mean, what we want and what we desire and what we crave isn't always what's best for us, right? I think Paul's trying to address that and warn the Philippian church about that same thing, um, that there's real food, like sustaining, like nutritious food for our soul, and that is a vibrant relationship with Jesus. It's exactly what Jackson was talking about last week. That we should be hunters of Jesus in the sense that we should be pursuing Him. But then Paul's warning against the fact that there is that our appetite um, will and can and does lead us to destruction. And so I want to read to you Philippians chapter 3, verse 17. And then we'll kind of focus just in on a couple verses for the most of part of this morning, just because these are the two verses that stuck with me. I think they're plain and easy to understand. I think it's worth considering what the implications are for each of us. So, Philippians chapter 3, verse 17. Paul says, "Brothers, join in imitating me and keep your eyes on those who walk according to the example that you have in us. For many, of whom I have often told you and now tell you even with tears, many walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. Their destruction, or their end, is destruction. Their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame, with minds set on earthly things. But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we await our Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself." Paul is urging the Philippian churches. He's kind of coming to the close of this letter, and he's urging the Philippian church to continue to pursue Jesus in the same way that he has modeled to them, that those who he has sent has modeled to them, that the ministers of the gospel that have been the leaders and they're in these churches as they've left, and the elders, and that to model, to imitate them, because he's afraid and he's warning them against this danger. He says that there's many who have walked alongside of us And he says, even now I have tears about those who have walked with us, but they're no longer with us because something has changed. They have now become enemies of the cross. They become enemies of the cross. And he says, their end is destruction. Their God is their bellies, or their God is their appetite. And they glory in their shame. That's the phrase that I kept going over and over again in my mind. Their God is their belly. The reason that stuck with me, it was hard to stop thinking about that, is because I had to immediately, not only do I know that that is like absolutely true, right? Like, I mean, even from the beginning in the Garden of Eden, like, I mean, the whole eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is this Adam and Eve are making their bellies their gods, their desires their gods, and they're kind of setting God aside for that. So not only do I inherently know that that statement is true, that our God can actually be our appetite, and we can shape our entire world around what we crave and what we want, and that can be really destructive, right? See it in my own kids, see it in my own life, see it in the church, see it outside the church. Our appetite isn't the most trustworthy thing. So that, yeah, it's true in the sense that, like, I can't even argue with that. That's so true. But the thing that made it difficult, and the reason that I kept going back to it again and again, is I had to ask myself, um, in what way has have I shaped God according to my appetite? Like, am I doing that exact same thing? Is really my God, the God that I worship, the way that I see him, the way that I understand him, the things that I think he wants for me, the things I think that matter to him, are they objectively what I have come to know about God and read and understand about God? Are they true of who God actually is, or are they more reflective of my own wants and desires and my own appetite? It seems real, like, for some reason, this thing that seems really simple um, has floored me, because for years and years and years, I've come to see that, you have Christians who say, well, we read the Bible and we stand for the objective truth of the Bible. But what you come to realize is that everyone who reads the Bible brings their own appetite, their own desire, their own framework to even reading and understanding the Bible. It's really hard to sift out the God that is and our appetites. I mean, it is. I don't think there's been a generation in all of human history that's been able to do that. Again and again and again, we continue to shape God in our own image. We continue to think that God thinks like us and desires like us and acts like us. It's how people like the Pharisees could be so off about the heart of God, even though they had all the words and all the Old Testament and all the rituals and all the religion and all the history and all the warnings and all the promises, all of it. They had all of that. And yet, unfortunately, it seems like in some ways the Pharisees had shaped their faith maybe more according to their bellies and according to the heart of the God who is the subject of it all, the object of our affection, right? I mean, if that happened then and it's happened pretty much ever since then, do I really think that I'm like exempt from that? That my concept and view and worship of God isn't impacted at all by my belly, by my desire, by my appetite? Like, is God who I want him to be? Do I worship God as I want him to be? Do I process my faith as I want God to be? Or am I really being true to who God has revealed himself to be? That's a challenging thought for me. I don't know. I hope it challenges you. I hope you stop to consider maybe how your appetite has shaped your faith? Pretty sure it's there. See, he says that the problem is that these people who he once walked with, who his heart now breaks for, they now walk as enemies of the cross. That's the way he describes it. Enemies of the cross. I think that's an important clue, maybe, into where our appetite might deceive us. Paul has spent a lot of this letter fighting for several different things. He's been fighting for the inclusion of the Gentiles, as he always does, that the church be an inclusive church that sees beyond these cultural boundaries, that includes all people. He has been fighting for the unity of these believers. He has been fighting um, for their continued participation in the work of Christ. He has been fighting for the centrality of centrality of Jesus in everything that we do, so that our satisfaction is in Him, not in our circumstances. Paul's been fighting for all of these things. What does it mean to be an enemy of the cross? I think that's an important distinction. Let's think about who the enemies of the cross were back in Jesus' time, right? I mean, quite literally, it's easier for me to think about it on kind of two different levels. The first level is there were so many people in Jesus' day that didn't think that Jesus had to die, right? Including his own disciples, including almost all of his followers, really. It also, uh, and so I think that when we start to consider what it means to be an enemy of the cross, I think we have to begin with this question of, do I really, and does my view of God and my view of myself and my view of my faith really depend on me needing that cross, right? Do I really need the cross? Did the cross have to happen? Why did the cross have to happen? What do we know about the cross? The cross had to happen because of the fact that we are sinful and off base, because we have continually allowed our appetites to drive us, our gods to be our bellies, and they've driven us to do things that are harmful to our relationship with God, harmful to other people, harmful to ourselves. It has been the human story over and over and over again, right? It doesn't matter if it's anger or murder or lust. It doesn't matter if it's adultery or lying or cheating. It doesn't matter if it's ignoring God's blatant command or the serving of money over Him. I mean, all of these things, all of these things are ways in which our human appetites have really driven us to destruction. And so to be an enemy of the cross, first and foremost, I think is to somehow minimize sin and somehow, in some way, make it seem like the things that I do aren't really wrong. The things that I do are okay. The ways that my appetite has shaped my view of God is fine. I mean, yours is pretty disgusting, but mine's all right. I mean, that's the thing. Like we have all allowed our appetites to get out of hand. And what Paul is ultimately saying here is that I believe that if we don't allow God to, if we don't need the cross, then we have sorely misunderstood. Like, if we don't continually see ourselves in this very humble light of like, look, man, I can't always discern whether my motivation is pure, whether I'm serving my appetite or not. I really can't. It is so hard for me, right? I mean, even in the latest decision I've just made with my life that many of you are obviously purview to, I'm constantly asking myself, did I decide to change my circumstances because I wanted to serve money and not God. I mean, I'm constantly asking myself that. I'm asking myself why. What are the motivations behind the decisions that I'm making? And honestly, it's hard to sort out. What the cross says is that we all need God to sort it out, right? That like our motives are impure, our appetites are our bellies, and we need Jesus to take our place for all the sin and all the wrong and all of the misguided steps and um, all of the things we really mess up, right? So, so that's one side of becoming an enemy of the cross. The other side that you see is it is all of the religious people at the time, like the Jews, who primarily were the reason for the cross to happen, right? Like they were the religious establishment that did not understand or believe or need or think that they needed Jesus, right? And so they actually killed him. They were enemies of the cross in the sense that they were the ones who actually put him to death, right? It was Jesus's confrontation with a religious order that actually got him killed. And so on one hand, we all personally need the cross. Um, but I think one of the big the big enemies is not thinking that the cross is sufficient, is actually sufficient. So on one hand, we may not think we need it. On the other hand, I think thinking that Jesus going to the cross to die as being sufficient enough for our faith is a huge problem. Huge. Okay, let's use a maybe more just easy, accessible story that I love um, in the Bible, and the story of the prodigal son. I think you see two different appetites very clearly in that story. You see the younger brother who has this appetite for, well, just like, you know, for money and women and experiences and pleasure. And so he takes his dad's inheritance, he goes and he spends it. And he does that in the sense that, I mean, his God is his belly, right? That is what it is. Like he's just pursuing whatever he wants to pursue. Just doing that, living that way. Well, that led him to destruction. But what he came to know is that he needed the Father's warm embrace and love and support. And so he came back. He knew he needed the Father. I think that's the same way that we must know that we need the cross. But then you have the other brother, who obviously represents the religious leaders of the day, who's sitting there saying that the Father's warm embrace of the son who's run away and come home is insufficient. It's not enough. It isn't complete. More reparations must be paid. The Father's warm embrace is not enough. And you see that this older brother's appetite is different. It's a different appetite. It's not necessarily the appetite to go squander money, but it's his appetite to be right, to be in the right tribe, to be on the right side, to do the right things, to be the one who didn't screw up, didn't make the mistake. It's a different type of appetite. It's a different type of desire, but it's a worldly desire all the same. And the father is trying to communicate to the son, all you need is to the son who ran away, all you need is my embrace. And he's also trying to communicate to the older brother that that simple embrace is sufficient. It's enough. It's okay. No more reparations have to be made. We don't need a track record or religious history to know whether this this son who was lost is now found and back in the family. I think that shows where it is to become an enemy of the cross. To become an enemy of the cross is to say, I don't need the cross, on one hand, or the things that I do are not that destructive. Yeah, I can cheat on my wife. I can pursue money and fame and fortune. I can um, kind of hurt other people and give full vent to my anger and frustration. I can It can do all of these things that we would recognize as um, filling this God of our belly, and not consider the fact that those things are all the things that point to my desperate need for the cross. That's one side. But the other side, I think, is just as deadly. And I think it's what Paul's trying to get at in the book to the Philippians. I mean, he's just talked about it. It's not the side we think about when we think about appetite. When we think about appetite, we don't often think about our religious appetites. The appetite we have to say to God, the people who do it like this, and this are right, and these other people are wrong. And I'm of course part of the right group. Um, See, it's our religious appetite that continues to kill the gospel. That's what Paul's saying, right? I mean, we just read through it in chapter 3. He was talking all about the fact that that there's this draw to pull back to circumcision as some sort of sign that you're more in than somebody else, right? And while circumcision, I don't hear much debate about that in the church these days. Um, Man, I do feel a lot of the same tensions, right? That we really think that we're part of the one true tribe, that our reading of Scripture is the right one, that our understanding of who God is the clear one. There's those crazies over there who are maybe too charismatic for our taste, and there's those zealots over there who are just too condemning for my faith. But I'm sit right here in this beautiful middle, right? What Paul is trying to express is that it is both an appetite for the on the nose things, like we'll just say sex and money and relationship and all of those, like very uh, like I don't know, pleasurable type things. And then there's this appetite to construct something more than the gospel, actually to construct a view of God that is more than the gospel, that it's more than the work of Christ on the cross being sufficient. And we continue to structure this sense that um, and to tribe up and to make these declarations of how we're all so um, I don't know, how we've all gotten it right. But I really think that that's what it is to be an enemy of the cross. It says, yeah, you needed Jesus to die for you, and you needed to not sin in these ways, and you needed to have the proper theology, and you needed to kind of worship in a church like ours, and you needed to be on the right side politically or whatever. I mean, I don't think many people really think that, but I think that's what it is to be an enemy of the cross. We don't think we need it. We give ourselves license to shape God as a God who gives license to all the sin we don't mind that we commit, or to be a people who actually settle for a religion shaped in the image that we want our religion to be. And all the while, God's grace and his cross is sufficient. There really isn't anything else needed. It's why he goes on to say in verse 20, our citizenship is in heaven. He doesn't say, like, look, God came to start a new religion. This new religion we now call Christianity. And it's kind of like the religion of the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, you had to have sacrifices. In this new religion, we just worship Jesus. But we have all of the same trappings. No, no, it's not the language that's used. The language that's used is that we're now we're citizens of a different way of living under a different king and rule, where 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 the gospel truly is enough, where there isn't a single person who hasn't given in to the god of their belly, right? There really isn't a person who hasn't gloried in their own shame. like celebrated the wrong things. But in the end, what Paul's saying is that the cross, like the fact that we get to know Jesus, the fact that he died for us, man, that's sufficient and that is good. And that can produce in us this freedom and this joy and this peace. But we gotta watch out for our bellies. The gods of our bellies who are gonna make it more, who's gonna say, hey, you didn't get circumcised. I'm not sure you really get it. The God of our bellies that's gonna say, yeah, I mean, God's totally cool with your absolute love and worship of money. Totally good with that, right? You can totally ignore the poor. God doesn't even care, right? God doesn't care that you're cheating on your wife. He loves you all the same. Just go do that. Do whatever pleases you. No, that's not the God of the Bible. That's why he came. He came to die for the fact that we make horrible decisions. We got to own that. We got to own that. But the beauty of the cross is that it's sufficient for everything we've done, for all the religion we construct. We get to be part of this new citizenship.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine